The thin blue line is a nationally recognized symbol of law enforcement made to represent the thin line that separates law and order and anarchy and those that guard that line.
We're here to serve the public.
Well, the responsibility of the police department is to serve and protect our citizens.
There's some satisfaction with knowing who did it, and that's where law enforcement comes in. And we've got to do that because we're their only hope.
So we are that blue line that stands between the criminals trying to take over and the normal everyday citizen. We protect them.
The history of law enforcement in Arkansas has been one of triumph and tragedy, as well as development and change. From its earliest territorial days, Arkansas has always been home to individuals willing to take on the mantle of law enforcers. Sometimes these characters have been corrupt, self-interested, or worse. But more often than not, these law enforcers have been persons who were interested in serving the greater good and preserving the peace in their communities. Charged with the task of enforcing the law in the Indian Territory were U.S. Marshals and their deputies.
The United States Marshal Service is actually the oldest federal law enforcement agency in the United States. It was formed in 1789 by the First Judiciary Act, and George Washington proposed that bill to the First Continental Congress of the United States, and that became the first act, and it established the federal court system, which included the United States Marshal Service. The primary focus of the United States Marshals is to protect the federal court buildings, the federal judges, and to handle security at the federal court buildings during trials, and we transport federal prisoners to and from their holding facilities to the courtroom. Another primary focus of the Marshal Service is the apprehension of federal fugitives.
Enforcing the law and protecting the public was no less dangerous for local officers.
It's a dangerous job. We've had troopers been shot and killed. We've had others lost their lives with traffic crashes.
The Progressive Era brought about even more changes. There were even greater calls for public accountability, and a number of vital reforms found their way into law enforcement. Chief among these were the creation of civil service commissions to oversee police departments, increased training and education for officers, and the establishment of various professional organizations to facilitate communication among agencies.
They had a law enforcement training academy out to Arkansas Medical Center, University of Arkansas Medical Center, and it pertained to 2 weeks training, and then you were on your own.
Well, now our rookie school is 20 weeks long. We cover everything from criminal law to civil rights to firearms to hand-to-hand combat.
I can only see training being a necessity. It's not, do you need to train? Can you afford not to train?
It's tough. It's not for everybody. It's a calling.
About the same time that these reforms were taking place, the idea that law enforcement agencies could benefit from cooperating with one another also took hold.
Law enforcement agencies coordinate and discuss problems and issues with each other all the time. Probably most oftentimes in the area of narcotics enforcement. We also discuss a lot of intelligence matters, criminal intelligence gathering and that kind of thing. We've known forever that criminals don't commit criminal acts in just one place.
Revolutionary changes were also taking place in regard to how police patrolled their areas and communicated with one another. From the beginnings of law enforcement in the United States, officers patrolled either on foot or on horseback. Indeed, for many years, the cop walking a beat was the most recognized public persona of a police officer.
Probably the biggest technology gain that we have is in communications. When we first started here in Little Rock, there was no communications. Officers were out on the street. Most of our officers rode motorcycles. We had a paddy wagon that we would send around to arrest people, but they had to call somebody. Then we had call boxes that showed up on all the corners, and you were responsible for an area. About every 30 minutes, you had to stop, get out of your car, go to unlock a box, pick up that phone, and call headquarters. Then came one-way radio. The dispatcher would simply broadcast, but the officers in the car could not communicate back with headquarters. Then somewhere in the 40s and 50s came two-way radio, where the headquarters could talk to a car and the car back to headquarters. Today we have three-way radio, so we can talk for not only headquarters to our officers in the field and officers back to headquarters, but the cars themselves can talk through the radio to each other. And now that has expanded into almost instant messaging, where if I need to tell the officer in the district next to me, I don't have to call him on the radio and say, hey, meet me over here, I need to tell you about this. I can simply type it on the computer in my police car, hit send, and it'll send it to his computer. He can read that. And as we get more into the technology, you'll see everything being dispatched, and probably the old radio system as we know it today will cease to exist, just like the call phones went away.
The industrial age and the advent of the automobile in the early 20th century allowed the departments to expand their reach and quicken their response time. This greater mobility resulted in a much more efficient and reactive police force.
When I went to work in '59, we had 3 patrol cars. We run them 24 hours a day.
The first police car I drove was a 1973 Plymouth Fury. You could land a small plane on the hood of it. It was huge. And our cars today have anything and everything that the officer needs.
That car essentially is his office, as such as your office at your desk. He has the capabilities to run radio communication traffic. He has the capabilities to utilize a computer, email, run DL checks. He also has a radar system within that car and an in-car camera.
The state police movement also corresponded to the rise of the automobile. In Arkansas, in an effort to address the increase in traffic fatalities, the state legislature established the State Road Patrol in 1929. The Road Patrol lacked the power to enforce criminal laws, so Governor Junius Futrell pushed to establish a statewide police force.
Act 120 of 1935, I would say, began the Arkansas State Police. When that act was approved by the General Assembly, it created the Arkansas State Rangers. There were 13 of them, and the headquarters at that time was housed in the east wing of the old State House here in Little Rock. In 1937, then, another bill was enacted that changed the name to the Arkansas State Police Department. And at that time, the duties changed somewhat. The original Arkansas Rangers' primary duty was to enforce liquor laws. Then in 1937, the troopers then were charged with their primary duty was enforcing traffic laws. If any of those 13 Rangers could be back with us today and see the operation that we have today, I think they'd be very, very proud.
Around this same time, the state received an increase in federal law enforcement presence as well. The Federal Bureau of Investigation opened its first field office in the state in 1924 in Little Rock.
In 1924, we had a special agent, Dunn, was in charge of what was called the Bureau of Investigation at that time. When we were formed, we really didn't have a name. It switched back and forth from the Division of Investigation to the Bureau of Investigation, and then finally in 1935 we became known as what we're known today, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The responsibilities of the FBI include the prevention of terrorism and the prevention of federal crimes. And we also partner with state and local and other federal law enforcement agencies to investigate a wide variety of crimes. But our priorities are as follows: the prevention of terrorism, both internationally and domestically. We are also gathering intelligence and preventing counterintelligence. We also want to prevent any cyber attacks, including computer intrusions, meeting of children over the internet for bad purposes. And we also want to prevent public corruption. The FBI is uniquely equipped to deal with public corruption on all levels: legislative corruption, judicial corruption, police corruption, etc.
A few years after the FBI opened an office in Arkansas, the Secret Service, the investigative and protective arm of the Treasury Department, opened its first permanent office in the state.
The Secret Service was established back in the 1800s, 1865 to be exact. Little known fact, we were established to combat counterfeiting throughout the United States. We're really a dual mission agency, one of the only federal agencies that have this unique responsibility. We have a protection aspect and we have an investigative aspect. Our protection aspect is basically the protection of the president, the vice president, the president-elect, the vice president-elect, major candidates to be president, their families, and any heads of foreign governments or states that come into the United States. But the Secret Service investigative responsibilities really is much more, and what's unique about our agency is people primarily think of us as being a protective agency. They forget all about our investigative responsibilities, which is great for us. We do everything from what we call a critical infrastructure. Counterfeiting of currency to credit card fraud, theft of data, identity theft, denial of service attacks, and now that we have moved from the Department of the Treasury over to the Department of Homeland Security, we have become more involved in what we would consider critical infrastructure.
In many ways, law enforcement in Arkansas today is very different from what it was in years past. Telegraphs have been replaced by email, horses replaced by automobiles, and science has become an integral part of crime fighting. However, what has not changed has been the dedication and sense of self-sacrifice that characterized even the earliest law enforcers in Arkansas.
Our men and women serve with honor and pride. They have a lot of integrity. Those men and women sacrifice daily to protect and serve the public in various aspects, some that you and I may seem as small, something not to measure, but in the totality of the performance of those men and women, they're heroes. They have put themselves in a position and they have worked to do their job the best that they can for the citizens of this state.